Thank you for tuning in to the newest episode of the Plain Bible Teaching Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Soker. This episode is being released on August 31st, 2023. And this week we're talking about the return of COVID. There's been a lot of talk lately about a new variant, mask mandates that may be coming back, and the fear of lockdowns and things like that could happen. And we went through all of this 3 years ago. And it seemed like we were finally past all of this and it was behind us. But now it appears that it's about to be thrust upon us again. So if all of these things come back, how should we as Christians handle it? That's what we're going to discuss in our episode today. For some related materials to our discussion, check out the show notes for this episode at plainbibleteaching.com/podcast/083123. Now for our discussion this week. When the pandemic began in March of 2020, all of us were caught off guard, and we had to react to it as best we could. And what usually happens when we encounter an unexpected and particularly challenging situation, we look back later after it's passed and think of ways that we could have or should have handled it differently. And when we talk about COVID coming back, though, we have a benefit this time. We have hindsight where we can look back and see what happened, see what we did and what we could do differently. But we also have a warning that it's coming, or that it could be coming, so we won't be caught off guard and unprepared. So seeing what we went through the first time, and as always, looking to the scriptures for guidance, how should we handle what could be coming here in the future? There are 3 points I want us to consider here today. Number 1, we still need to be assembling with our brethren. This was a common mistake that was made the first time when COVID first hit and the pandemic first started. Most congregations closed their doors for a time and did not assemble. Even our congregation, we closed and did not meet for about 4 or 5 weeks. Now, I have said before, and I'll say it again, that was a mistake. We should not have done that. But again, looking back, you always see things that you did that you wish you did differently, or you should have done something else. So we have hindsight. All of us do. All of us saw what we did. So if your congregation, our congregation, closed the first time, don't let it happen again. Learn from the first time and don't make the same mistakes. If you're sick, stay home. If your immune system is compromised, take precautions just as you would during cold and flu season. If you're healthy, don't let news reports about a virus or government mandates keep you from assembling. This is important. Remember what the Hebrew writer said in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25. And let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds, not forsaking our own assembling together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. His point was, assembling is important, and it is even more important when you are facing difficult times and things are going to be hard. You're going to need your brethren. I wrote about this in an article at the end of 2020. The article was titled, What This Year Has Taught Us. I'll link to that in the show notes. But in that article, I mentioned a survey that was done that showed that Americans' mental health rating dropped to a new low among every demographic except one. That one that did not have this historic drop in their mental health rating were those who attended religious services weekly. We need our brethren. We need our brethren in order to give and receive encouragement. Online communication can supplement this, but it cannot replace it. So if all of this is coming back, we need to be assembling with our brethren anyway. Number 2, we need to remember the God-given role of civil authorities. Civil authorities are there, according to God's role for them, to punish evildoers and protect those who are innocent. Romans 13 verses 3 and 4 says, "For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For it is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil." So Paul said there, civil authorities, they were ordained by God to punish evildoers and to protect those who are innocent. But also they are there to provide an environment in which we are free to serve the Lord and carry out the responsibilities that He has given us. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 2 and 3, Paul told Timothy that we are to pray for kings and for all who are in authority, so that we may lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness and dignity. This is good and acceptable in the sight of God, our Savior. So the role that God has given to civil authorities is to punish evildoers, protect the innocent, and to provide and maintain an environment in which we can be free to serve the Lord without fear and without hindrance. However, when it comes to all the lockdowns and mandates and everything that we saw 3 years ago, we need to remember that it is not good for the authorities to target and punish those who are serving God and carrying out their daily responsibilities that God has given to them. The wise man said in Proverbs 17 and verse 26, "It is also not good to fine the righteous, nor to strike the noble for their uprightness." If the government is threatening to fine or even to arrest Christians for assembling, for visiting others, for working, for providing for their families, or anything like that, it is not good. That is not why God ordained civil authorities. They are doing the exact opposite of what God ordained them for. They are the ones who are violating God's law. So we are free to ignore those mandates. Submission to authorities does not include submission to laws that stand in the way of our duties as Christians. Then the third point. We need to stop being immediately dismissive of conspiracy theories. And I know there will be brethren who will want to push back on this point, but I want you to hear me out and consider what I have to say here. Those who immediately dismiss anything that is labeled as a conspiracy theory by the authorities, by the media, or by people around them have really put too much faith in the authorities, the media, and the people around them. I wrote about this in an article a couple years ago. The article was titled "The Christian and Conspiracy Theories." There'll be a link in the show notes. And there are several points in there. I think there were 6 points that we noticed. But one I want to highlight here today. Notice what Jesus said to his disciples in Matthew 10, verse 16. "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves." There are wolves out there that want to harm us. That's not some conspiracy theory. That's what Jesus said. There are wolves out there who want to harm his disciples. Knowing this, we are to be shrewd as serpents, or wise as serpents, so that we are not taken advantage of, so that we don't suffer harm unnecessarily. Obviously, we should not immediately embrace every conspiracy theory we hear. But we should also not immediately reject everything that has been called a conspiracy theory. Instead, we need to exercise wisdom as we focus on faithfully serving the Lord. Now, on this topic of COVID coming back, or really the potential of lockdowns and other COVID-related policies coming back, I read an article recently that was really good that I want to share part of it and encourage you to read the rest of the article. It was written by Jack Wilkie. The title of the article was COVID Never Again. But here's an excerpt from that article regarding our assembling with the church. He said, "We do not gather because we think it's safe enough to do so at present. We do not gather because the government has said it's fine for now. We do not gather because the culture currently thinks it's okay to do so. As we've seen, all of those things can change, and if they do, it should not affect us since those aren't our reasons for gathering in the first place. We gather because Jesus Christ deserves our presence and worship, and our church family is owed our dedication and service. That will not change. I will never, ever be locked out of worship again. And if Ebola or some other mass extinction threat runs through the populace, and God sees fit to let it take me and my family because we gathered for worship, so be it. God gives and God takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Perhaps we are too afraid of what the authorities think, too afraid of what the media tells us, and too afraid of what a virus might do to us, when, above all else, we need to fear God and keep His commandments, as Ecclesiastes 12 and 13 tells us to. So in summary, compared to what we experienced in March of 2020, when the pandemic first hit, we have a couple of advantages this time around. We have the benefit of hindsight, so we can see what happened and how we could have handled things differently. We also have the advantage of being warned about what could be coming. So whatever happens in the coming months, let's focus on being faithful. Let's exercise wisdom. And let's not allow the wolves out there to harm us and our brethren. That's all for this week. Thank you for listening to the Plain Bible Teaching Podcast. Hope you found this to be interesting, informative, and helpful. For links that are related to our discussion, one of those that I mentioned, I read an excerpt from an article that I encourage you to check out. All of those will be linked in the show notes. You can check those out at plainbibleteaching.com/podcast/083123. If you have a moment to rate and review the podcast or share it with others that you think would be interested, that is always appreciated. And if you're listening to this, remember that we are also uploading video versions to the Plain Bible Teaching YouTube channel. So if you prefer to watch this on video, that option is there for you. And if you are watching this on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you can see other videos that we're posting here. And if you see a news story or have some topic that you think would make for a good discussion, please send that to me at andy@plainbibleteaching.com. Thanks again for listening, and I hope to talk to you again next week.